Christine Louise Johnson, known to everyone as Christy, was born on February 27, 1981 in Los Gatos, California. Her family was living in South America at the time, but her mom had chosen to return to the same hospital where Christy's older brother Derek was born, under the care of the same doctor. After just a few days, Christy came home from the hospital to her grandparents' house nearby. She was just 6 weeks old when she got her passport and traveled with her mom and brother back to their home in South America. Not long after that, the family moved back to California, where Christy's early childhood was filled with sunshine, poolside play, ballet lessons, beach stays, swim meets, and birthday parties. It was a happy, active start for a little girl full of joy. When her dad got a business opportunity in Michigan, the family relocated to Holland, near Lake Michigan. That brought snowy winters, sledding, skiing, and tulip festivals in the spring. Christy took to it all: sports, the arts, friendships. Eventually, her parents' marriage came to an end, and Christy and Derek moved with their mom to a little lakeside town called Saugatuck, just up the road from where their dad still lived. That chapter of her life was filled with more outdoor adventures. Growing up in a summer tourist town meant Christy started working young, scooping ice cream, helping out in local shops, waiting tables. She was motivated, always moving towards something. After high school, she headed to Western Michigan University, joined Sigma Kappa, and began college life. But there was always this pull in her heart to get back to California, the place where her story began. So after her freshman year, Christy made the leap. She moved back to California to continue college and pursue something bigger. Her mom followed shortly after, once both kids had left the nest. Christy was 21, full of dreams and living in Los Angeles, chasing a future she was excited to build. On the afternoon of February 15, 2003, Christy was at the Century City Mall when she was approached by a man named Victor Paleologos. He told her he was a filmmaker and that he was casting a new James Bond movie. They were looking for a fresh face to play the next Bond girl, he said. And Christy had the look. She believed him. She went to the audition. She never came home. When Christy didn't show up for work the next day, her mom immediately knew something was wrong and reported her missing. Days passed, then weeks, and then in March, hikers in the Hollywood Hills found a body at the bottom of a ravine. Her hands and ankles were bound, and she'd been strangled. A hibiscus tattoo on her lower back confirmed what nobody wanted to believe. It was Christy. The investigation uncovered a deeply disturbing pattern. This wasn't the first time Paleologos had lured a woman using a fake audition. Back in 1998, he tried the same trick, offering a role in a Bond film, then attempted to sexually assault the woman. He was convicted and served 5 years in prison. He was released on January 20, 2003. Christy was murdered just 26 days later. After her death, several women came forward with chillingly similar stories. A man posing as a casting agent approached them with promises of fame and film roles. It was always the same script, the same setup. It was calculated, intentional. The whole setup was hauntingly similar to the way serial killer Rodney Alcala operated decades earlier, luring women with promises of modeling or acting opportunities. Paleologos may not be as widely known, but his methods were just as manipulative and just as dangerous. Eventually, he was arrested, initially in connection with another incident. But the evidence surrounding Christy's case grew too strong to ignore. What made it even more horrifying was how methodical it all was. He had a routine, he knew what he was doing, and he knew how to make people trust him. Facing overwhelming evidence, he took a plea deal in 2006, avoiding the death penalty and receiving a sentence of 25 years to life in prison. Victor Lawrence Paleologos is a manipulative predator who's proven more than once how dangerous he is. He doesn't deserve freedom. He doesn't deserve another chance. But incredibly, he's up for parole again. His next hearing is scheduled for October 8, 2025 at 10:30 a.m. Christy deserved so much more. She was just 21. Bright, loving, and full of potential, she believed in the goodness of people. She trusted someone who said he would help her reach her dreams, and he stole everything from her. If you'd like to help make sure Paleologos stays exactly where he belongs, behind bars, Marcus Leon M.J. Daniels Jr. was born on December 10, 2002 in Louisville, Mississippi. He was the firstborn child of Marcus Daniels Sr. and Adrian Jackson, and from the very beginning, MJ had this energy that just drew people in. Whether it was his bright, contagious smile or his natural charisma, you couldn't help but feel better in his presence. MJ grew up loving sports. Football was his first passion, but he also excelled at baseball and basketball. He enjoyed fishing, hunting, traveling, dancing, and even goofing around trying to sing. He wasn't just athletic, he was magnetic. Friends and family say there was never a dull moment when MJ was around. He had a deep love for his family and made time for those closest to him. At George County High School, MJ was a standout. He was Mr. George County High School in 2021 and a true hometown hero. With offers pouring in for both football and baseball, MJ ultimately chose to play football at the University of Mississippi Ole Miss from 2021 to 2022. In 2023, he transferred to the University of Southern Mississippi, ready for a fresh chapter and eager to shine on the field as a Golden Eagle. He was a defensive back heading into his senior season with a bright future ahead. Off the field, MJ worked at the Tri-State Maritime Services and lived at the Ivy Row Apartments in Hattiesburg. Life was lining up for him. He had plans, he had momentum, and he had people cheering him on. But all of that came to a tragic, violent end on June 11, 2024. That afternoon, MJ was sitting in his black Dodge Challenger outside his apartment complex when someone called 911 to report gunshots. First responders arrived to find MJ slumped in the driver's seat, dead from a single gunshot wound to the back of his head near his neck. It was a brutal and calculated execution. Investigators found a 9mm shell casing near the passenger side of the vehicle and noted 2 bullet holes, one on the passenger side and one on the driver's side. The driver's side bullet didn't penetrate the car. Fingerprints were lifted from the vehicle's exterior, including prints belonging to Shamir Green. At least 3 witnesses were on the scene, though their names haven't been made public. One of them, a woman walking her dog, said she noticed 4 males following her moments before the shooting. She grew nervous and called her roommate as she walked back toward her unit. When she neared the door, the group turned and walked away. 2 days later, 3 suspects, Orlando May, Alan Marcus Gardner, and Shamir Green, were arrested. May and Green were pulled over near Hattiesburg High School in what turned out to be a stolen vehicle. They fled from police on foot but were quickly apprehended. Officers found a .38 caliber handgun inside the car. A 4th suspect, 17-year-old Nadavian Shaw, was arrested 9 days later. Each of the suspects faced serious charges. Orlando May, believed to be the shooter, was eventually convicted of capital murder. He was also found guilty of conspiracy to commit armed robbery, taking possession of a motor vehicle, possession of a stolen firearm, and felony eluding police. The courtroom atmosphere was intense. MJ's family sat in heavy silence as the verdict was read. Some cried, others quietly celebrated justice. May, on the other hand, showed no emotion. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for capital murder. He also received 20 years for conspiracy to commit armed robbery and 10 years for the stolen vehicle charge. Those sentences will run concurrently. The others involved all took plea deals. Gardner and Green, 18 and 17 at the time, pleaded guilty in February 2025 to first-degree murder. Gardner also admitted to conspiracy to commit armed robbery. In exchange for their pleas, other charges were dropped. Earlier in October 2024, Shaw had pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. Natavia and Shaw, Alan Gardner, and Samir Green, the 3 co-defendants, were sentenced in July 2025. Each teen was sentenced to 40 years in prison and will be eligible for parole after 20 years. MJ had his entire life ahead of him, a promising football career, a supportive family, a whole future to build. Instead, that promise was stolen by senseless violence. What's left now is the memory of a young man who gave so much to those around him and a grieving family fighting to keep his legacy alive. Morgan Dana Harrington was born on July 24, 1989 in Charlottesville, Virginia. She was smart, driven, and full of personality. By the time she was 20, Morgan was a junior at Virginia Tech, studying education and planning to become a teacher. She worked over the summer at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine alongside her father, Dr. Daniel Harrington, and those who knew her described her as kind-hearted, spirited, and unforgettable. She had this booming, joyful laugh that made people smile. Morgan left an impact everywhere she went. On October 17, 2009, she was at the John Paul Jones Arena in Charlottesville for a Metallica concert. She was excited for weeks, maybe months. Her mom said she'd posted the tickets on the fridge 6 months earlier and had tried on multiple outfits that day before settling on a Black Pantera shirt and a crystal necklace. That night, Morgan left her friends during the concert to use the restroom, but she never came back. At some point, she called her friends and said she was outside and couldn't get back in because of the arena's strict no-reentry policy. She told them not to worry, she'd find a ride home. Why she left the building in the first place is still a mystery. The arena had bathrooms inside, but for whatever reason, she ended up outside. Witnesses later spotted someone matching her description walking alone near the Copley Road Bridge, about a mile from the arena. The next morning, Morgan's purse, ID, and cell phone were found in a parking lot near the arena, but Morgan was gone. 3 months later, on January 26, 2010, her remains were found in a hayfield on Anchorage Farm in Albemarle County, about 10 miles from the arena. She had been sexually assaulted and murdered. The discovery shattered her family, who had held out hope and led massive search efforts. Her death left an entire community shaken. For years, there were no answers. Then, in September 2014, another young woman disappeared in Charlottesville, 18-year-old University of Virginia student Hannah Graham. Like Morgan, she vanished after a night out. Surveillance footage captured Hannah walking unsteadily down the street, and a man was seen with his arm around her. Later identified as Jesse Leroy Matthew Jr., it didn't take long for police to connect Matthew to the case. He was a patient technician at the UVA Medical Center and had a troubling history. Investigators tracked him down on a beach in Galveston, Texas, and arrested him. A few weeks later, Hannah's remains were found on an abandoned property just 12 miles from where Morgan's body had been discovered. Matthew's arrest turned out to be the break Morgan's case desperately needed. DNA recovered from her body matched DNA from an unsolved 2005 sexual assault and attempted murder case in Fairfax, Virginia. That same DNA now linked Jesse Matthew to all 3 crimes: Fairfax, Morgan, and Hannah. In September 2015, nearly 6 years after Morgan's murder, a grand jury indicted Matthew on charges of first-degree murder and abduction with intent to defile in her case. On March 2, 2016, he pleaded guilty to the murders of both Morgan Harrington and Hannah Graham. In exchange for his guilty plea, he was sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole, waiving all rights to appeal. By then, he had already entered an Alford plea in the 2005 Fairfax case, meaning he didn't admit guilt but acknowledged that prosecutors had enough evidence to convict him. That alone had earned him 3 life sentences. What's more disturbing is that Matthew had been accused of sexual assaults at Liberty University and Christopher Newport University in 2002 and 2003. But the women didn't pursue charges at the time, so he kept slipping through the cracks, working jobs, even driving a taxi until he was hired at a hospital. He was hiding in plain sight for years. In court, Morgan's parents came face to face with the man they always believed was responsible for their daughter's death. Her father told reporters he needs to know that justice is coming, and it did. Today, Morgan's legacy lives on through the Morgan Dana Harrington Memorial Scholarship Fund at the Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. Each year, the Docs for Morgan basketball game brings together physicians and students in her honor, raising money for future medical students while keeping her memory alive. It's not just about what was lost. It's about carrying forward the love and passion Morgan gave to the world. Sarah Everard was born in 1987 in Surrey, England, and spent much of her childhood in York. She went to Fulford School, and from early on she stood out for being thoughtful, kind, and full of quiet determination. In 2005, She began studying human geography at Durham University and graduated 3 years later from St. Cuthbert's Society. By the time she was 33, Sarah was living in Brixton Hill, South London, working as a marketing executive for a digital media agency. She had friends who adored her, a supportive family, and a future filled with possibility. But that future was stolen from her on the night of March 3, 2021. Sarah had been visiting a friend near Clapham Junction and left around 9 p.m. to walk home, which would have taken roughly 50 minutes. She wore bright clothing, stuck to the main roads, and followed all the safety advice women are given. She walked along the A205 South Circular Road across the Common en route to her Brixton Hill home. She spoke to her boyfriend on her phone for about 15 minutes and agreed to meet him the next day. At 9:28, she was seen on doorbell camera footage on Pointers Road and 4 minutes later on the dash cam of passing police car. Sadly, she never made it home. As she walked along the A205 Pointers Road, she was approached by Wayne Couzens, a Metropolitan Police officer. He was 48 years old, married with 2 children, and worked in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command. That night, he was off duty and driving a rental car he'd booked days earlier. He'd also purchased self-adhesive film, marketed as a carpet protector, believed to be part of his plan. Couzens used his warrant card and handcuffs to stage a fake arrest. He told Sarah she was being detained for violating COVID-19 restrictions. A couple driving by even witnessed the interaction and assumed it was a legitimate arrest. It took less than 5 minutes for Couzens to handcuff Sarah, force her into the car, and drive away. He took her 80 miles to Kent, where he transferred her to his own vehicle. In a remote area near Dover, he sexually assaulted and strangled her using his police-issued belt. By 2:30 a.m., he was seen at a service station buying drinks. Later that day, he returned to where he'd left Sarah's body. He purchased gas and a refrigerator. As if he hadn't done enough evil deeds, he then decided to burn her remains and placed what was left into green rubble bags, which he dumped in a pond at Hodes Wood, just 130 meters from the land he owned. While the country searched for Sarah, Couzens went on about his life like nothing had happened. He called a vet about his dog, spent time with his kids, and even brought his family to the same woods where he had burned her body. On March 8th, the day he was due back at work, Couzens called in sick. Detectives had tracked a white Vauxhall Crossland, captured on CCTV near where Sarah was last seen, back to a rental car company. That car had been hired by Wayne Couzens. From there, investigators used phone data, automatic number plate recognition, and security footage to trace his movements from London to Kent. His phone and Sarah's had connected to the same cell towers at critical times, and GPS data showed him traveling to areas later identified as the locations where her remains were found. As the evidence piled up, Couzens quickly became their prime suspect. In his first interview, Couzens lied. He claimed he was being blackmailed by a gang after underpaying a sex worker, and that he handed Sarah over to 3 men in a van. I've been led on by, I don't know who they are, they're a group, gang, whatever, and they told me, well, I need to go and pick up girls and get them to them. So I sit happening, and it then came through that. But the evidence, CCTV, phone data, and vehicle tracking told the truth. And on March 10th, police found Sarah's burned remains in Kent. Dental records confirmed her identity. A post-mortem found she died from compression of the neck. That same day, Couzens was charged with murder. As the investigation continued, the public learned Sarah hadn't been targeted. Couzens didn't know her. Prosecutors said he had been hunting for a victim, driving into London in the weeks before the attack with the intent to kidnap, sexually assault, and murder a woman. It was all planned. And what made it worse was that there had been warning signs. Couzens had exposed himself to women at least 3 times before the murder. One incident happened in 2015 and was reported to Kent police. 2 more occurred just days before Sarah's murder at a South London fast food drive-thru. He used his own car, his license plate was visible, and still nothing was done. Despite multiple reports, Couzens remained on duty, armed and trusted. On March 12th, he was formally charged with kidnap and murder. He eventually pled guilty to all charges. On September 30th, 2021, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In court, Sarah's family delivered emotional impact statements. Her father, Jeremy, demanded that cousins look him in the eye. "You murdered our daughter and forever broke the heart of our family," he said. Her mother, Susan, told the court, burning her body was the final insult. "You burned our lives." Sarah's murder sparked a nationwide reckoning. Candlelight vigils were held across the UK. Women shared stories of harassment and fear. The phrase, "she was just walking home," became a call for change. And it wasn't just about cousins. It was about a broken system. The Metropolitan Police faced intense scrutiny. The Independent Office for Police Conduct launched investigations. In 2022, the government appointed Dame Elish Angiolini to lead a public inquiry into cousins' policing career. When the first part of the report was released in 2024, it was damning. Both Kent Police and the Met had failed to act on multiple red flags. His pattern of indecent exposure and disturbing behavior should have disqualified him from the force. The conclusion was devastating. Sarah's murder was preventable. In response, the Met committed to reform. They appointed Baroness Casey to review culture and standards. A new action plan prioritized arresting predatory offenders. Specialist units were expanded. Hundreds of new officers were deployed in public areas. Allegations of abuse and misconduct by police officers were re-examined and vetting procedures were overhauled. The very unit cousins had worked in the Parliamentary and Diplomatic Protection Command was put under full review. They also introduced new safety measures. If someone is approached by a lone plainclothes officer, that officer is now expected to offer live verification through a police video call, or the person can call 999 directly to confirm their identity. But the revelations didn't stop. In 2024, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to 19 additional months in prison for 3 indecent exposure incidents he committed before Sarah's murder. One involved him stepping into the path of a female cyclist while naked and masturbating in a wooded area. Another involved him exposing himself to fast food workers twice in the days just before abducting Sarah, and still no one stopped him. 2 officers are now facing misconduct hearings over how they handled those reports, and the Met is still reckoning with the fallout from other scandals, most notably former officer David Carrick, who admitted to 49 offenses, including 24 sexual assaults, over nearly 2 decades. He, too, wore a badge and used his position to prey on women. A report from late 2023 found that misconduct complaints, many filed by fellow officers or family, took more than a year on average to resolve. That slow system of accountability left dangerous men in uniform. Sarah Everard's murder wasn't just a horrific crime. It was a flashing warning light that something was deeply wrong in British policing. But her story has driven change, and her name will never be forgotten. Susan Elizabeth Malden was 65 years old and living in Fleming Island, Florida. She was a widow, independent, smart, and not someone who backed down when she was being taken advantage of. And in the fall of 2019, something was very wrong. She'd paid $12,000 to a contractor named Corey Benderum to remodel her bathroom. But months passed and the bathroom wasn't just incomplete. It had been gutted and left in ruins. Benderum kept stringing her along with excuse after excuse. Eventually, Susan had enough. A close friend later told investigators that Susan was done waiting. She was going to confront him, demand her money back, and if he didn't cooperate, she'd go to the police and take legal action. She meant it. On the morning of October 24, 2019, the day after Susan was supposed to give him that ultimatum, Benderum pulled into a Home Depot around 7 a.m. Surveillance cameras caught him buying 2 60-pound bags of quick-drying concrete and a pack of heavy-duty demo bags. After that, he drove into Susan's neighborhood and called her twice. Just before 8:30 a.m., a school bus camera caught his white truck backed into her driveway. Later, Benderum told police he'd just stopped by to pick up tools and that he gave Susan a check for $1,200. But investigators found the account he used didn't even have enough funds to cover the check. And by 8:45, Benderham had shut off his location-sharing app and was on his way to the Rosemary Hill Waste Management Facility. There, he dumped roughly 300 pounds of material. The next day, when Susan didn't respond to texts or calls, a friend went to check on her. She was at home and something felt off. Police were called. Inside the house, officers found signs of a struggle, blood on a lampshade, more on the living room floor, and even more in the kitchen. Susan was nowhere to be found. Menderum immediately became a person of interest. In December, he was arrested, though not for Susan's disappearance, at least not yet. He was booked in Jacksonville on a forgery charge and held on $50,000 bond. By that time, investigators had already noticed the deep scratches on his arms and hands. A cadaver dog alerted to the smell of decomposition coming from a tool bag in his storage unit, one he'd previously used at Susan's home. Then came a chilling confession from a jailhouse informant. Venderam admitted to choking and hitting a client during an argument about payment. She started getting loud. The informant recalled him saying, "And I was trying to shut her up." That led to a massive coordinated search in January 2020 at the Chester Island landfill in Folkestone, where trash from the Rosemary Hill facility was sent. The FBI, Clay County Sheriff's Office, and state prosecutors mobilized a large-scale recovery effort. Around 70 to 90 personnel worked 12-hour shifts daily in brutal conditions, hot, filthy, dangerous. They sifted through more than 7,000 tons of garbage. "This is like searching for a needle in a haystack," said State Attorney Melissa Nelson. FBI Special Agent Brian Ragucci remembered standing at the edge of the landfill and quietly saying, "Susan, where are you? Help us find you." On January 29th, after 9 grueling days, they did. A Clay County Corrections officer spotted a portion of a human skull with hair still attached. More remains were found the next day. Dental records confirmed what no one wanted to believe. It was Susan Malden. Dr. Edmund Donahue, the forensic pathologist, determined she'd been beaten and strangled. The cause of death was blunt force trauma. The fractured bone in her neck showed she'd also been strangled. Venderam was formally charged with Susan's murder on March 3, 2020. At trial, prosecutors laid out exactly what happened. Venderam knew she was going to demand her money. He killed her inside her home, placed her body in those contractor bags, and dumped her at the landfill, discarded like trash. During opening statements, Assistant State Attorney Ashley Terry said, "He tossed her out like the garbage he thought she was." It was a line that stuck and haunted everyone who heard it. The defense tried to argue that Venderam's actions were shaped by drug addiction, mental illness, and even football-related brain trauma. They brought in doctors to talk about his history of concussions, family mental health, and his use of cocaine to self-medicate, but the jury wasn't buying it. On October 14, 2024, nearly 5 years after Susan's murder, Corey Venderam was found guilty of first-degree murder burglary during a battery and tampering with evidence. 2 days later, the jury recommended life in prison without parole, sparing him the death penalty by just 1 vote. His attorney has since filed a motion for a new trial. Whether or not that goes anywhere, the damage is already done. Susan's gone. She was murdered in her own home over a bathroom remodel that was never even started by someone she trusted to do a job. It's the kind of senseless violence that leaves you stunned. What stands out the most isn't just the horror of what happened. It's how many people stepped up when she couldn't. Brands who raised the alarm, investigators who refused to give up, dozens of people out in the Georgia heat digging through tons of garbage because they believed Susan deserved to be found. She didn't have close family around her at the time, but in the end, she had a whole team of strangers who made sure she wasn't just another missing person, another cold case. They brought her home and they brought her killer to justice. Hannah Marie Mack was born on June 2, 2001 to Russell and Dana Mack in Ennis. She was a joyful, imaginative little girl who had just started first grade. Hannah loved dressing up like a princess, reading her favorite books, riding her bike, and playing with her dolls. At just 6 years old, she was living with her mom in the quiet, close-knit community of Navarro Mills Lake, southwest of the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Also living in the home was Dana's boyfriend, Kevin Wayne Anders, not to be confused with a nearby neighbor, Sean Earl Arender, whose DNA would later break open the case. On the morning of September 10, 2007, Dana woke up to a nightmare. Hannah was missing from her bedroom. Within minutes, she made a horrific discovery. Her daughter's body was in their detached garage, hanging from the rafters. The initial investigation quickly zeroed in on Kevin Anders. Authorities found disturbing, inappropriate images of children on his computer. He was arrested, convicted, and sent to prison in 2007, where he remains to this day. His parole has been denied over and over. Though he was the primary suspect in Hannah's murder, no physical evidence ever directly linked him to the crime. Then a breakthrough. DNA recovered from Hannah's clothing matched to her neighbor, 19-year-old Sean Arender, who lived less than a mile away. Arender had a criminal history that included burglary and drug offenses. He was already on law enforcement's radar. After his arrest, he agreed to plead guilty in 2008 in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without parole. But before the plea was finalized, Arender made a bombshell revelation in court. He claimed that Kevin Anders had actually orchestrated the entire crime. According to Arender, he was walking through the neighborhood smoking marijuana when Anders invited him over. They shared drugs, and then, according to Arender, things took a horrifying turn. He said Anders led him toward the house, brought Hannah outside, and when she started to scream, Anders choked her until she passed out. Arender said he froze, overwhelmed by shock, and believed she had died after being choked a second time. He went on to claim that Anders then encouraged him to assault the unconscious child, telling him it was something she had experienced before. Afterwards, they allegedly moved Hannah's body to the garage and staged the scene by hanging her with an extension cord. When the judge asked whether Hannah was still alive at that point, Arender said she was unresponsive and wasn't opening her eyes. The courtroom was devastated. One of Hannah's aunts reportedly fled the room in tears. Arender's attorney said his client came forward to clear his conscience. He also revealed something disturbing. Anders and Arender had first met in jail before Hannah's murder. Despite Arender's detailed testimony, no new charges were ever brought against Kevin Anders. To this day, there's still no forensic evidence tying him to Hannah's murder. But many believe Anders played a much larger role than was ever proven in court. Some speculate that Arender's claims and Anders' criminal history are exactly why parole continues to be denied. Arenders is currently serving a life sentence without the possibility of parole. Anders also remains in prison, still serving time on charges related to inappropriate material involving children. Neither man has walked free since Hannah's death. Hannah's murder rocked Navarro County and broke hearts across Texas. The details of her case were almost too horrific to comprehend, and yet what's never been lost is the memory of who she was. A sweet little girl who loved storybooks, sparkly costumes, and the magic of childhood. Hannah will always be 6, and her family, and her community will always remember her. Henry X. Smith was born on July 6, 1968, in Batesville, Indiana, to Beecher Smith and Jewel Compton. He grew up in a small, tight-knit town where just about everybody knew each other, and he had a deep love for the outdoors. By the time he was 43, Henry had built a simple life. He fished, hunted mushrooms, chased squirrels, just the kind of man who found peace in nature. He lived in Laurel, Indiana, but worked as a general laborer at the Applegate Company in Hamilton, Ohio. Henry looked out for people, especially the ones he cared about, but he was also considered the black sheep of his family. His life hadn't been easy. He struggled with mental health and spent time in and out of jail. He didn't have much, but he was trying. And in the last chapter of his life, he was finding peace, reading the Bible, studying scripture with his friend, Jacob Napier. He was making changes. But all of that was cut short on Sunday, September 25, 2011. That morning, Henry left the house he shared with his mother to go visit the Napier family, his friends. Later that day, his cousin Spencer passed him on the road. They waved at each other. No one knew it then, but that would be the last time anyone in the family saw Henry alive. The events of that day would become known as the Laurel 5 murders, though to be clear, the home where it all happened was actually much closer to the small town of Buena Vista than to Laurel. The property sat along Stips Hill Road, a quiet rural stretch where homes are few and far between. Still, every news story and headline labeled it Laurel, and soon the whole country would know that name. For members of the Napier family were found shot to death inside their mobile home that afternoon. Roy, Angela, Melissa, and Jacob. Angela had just been visiting. Jacob was only 18. Melissa, 23, had a little girl, 4 years old. That little girl, Sierra Mann, survived, but she saw everything. Later that day, she was found walking alone, barefoot, and in shock along a country road. John Kessler, a retired firefighter, and his wife spotted her while driving by. They stopped immediately. She didn't speak, just stared off into space, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. She had just watched her entire family be murdered, and then she saw something else. She saw Henry Smith try to save her. Henry had arrived at the house sometime after the murders began. It's believed he sensed something was off and managed to get Sierra out, either through the door or a window. He had no idea David Eisen, the man who had just murdered her family, was still inside the home, and he definitely didn't know Amanda Napier was sitting outside in a vehicle. Amanda, who wasn't related to the Napier family, despite sharing their last name, had allegedly set up a drug deal between Eisen and Roy Napier. She saw Henry arrive, and instead of warning him, she warned Eisen. That phone call sealed Henry's fate. Eisen stormed out, armed, and chased Henry down. He shot him in the chest, then beat him so badly his face was unrecognizable. Sierra witnessed it all from the window. She had already seen her family executed. Now she watched the only person who tried to protect her be murdered too. Henry wasn't even there to fight. Earlier that day, Roy Napier and Eisen had gotten into a dispute over pills. Roy had raised the price by $2. That argument, according to investigators, may have sparked the massacre. But Henry walked into a nightmare he didn't cause, didn't understand, and never saw coming. In the end, his final act was trying to save a child. There was one other member of the immediate Napier family who wasn't at home that day, 26-year-old Josh Napier. He was left to bury his mother, father, brother, sister, and his friend Henry. That's a kind of grief most people can imagine. When police arrived at the scene, Henry was missing, so naturally suspicion fell on him. But then they found his body across the road, shot, beaten, and left for dead. It became painfully clear he wasn't the killer, he was the fifth victim. Sierra Mann, now grown, still credits Henry with saving her life. His final moments weren't defined by his past or the mistakes he'd made. They were defined by courage. Despite his reputation as the black sheep, Henry received a hero's burial. David Eisen was arrested just days later. Police found the murder weapon, an AK-47, blood-stained clothes, a stolen phone, and more. He was wearing a disguise when they caught him. Wig, fake beard, glasses, and hat. His rap sheet already stretched a mile long. Armed robbery, burglary, forgery, counterfeiting. He was even on probation when he committed the murders, and yet he didn't get the death penalty. Neither did Amanda Napier. She walked away without being charged for her role in Henry's murder. Months earlier, she had been arrested for acting as Eisen's getaway driver during a failed robbery in another county. But when it came to the murders, nothing stuck. She's free today. Eisen eventually pleaded guilty to all charges. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, one for each of the 5 people he killed, including Henry Smith. The death penalty was on the table, but Eisen avoided it by pleading guilty and accepting life in prison instead. And then in one final moment of cruelty, as he was being led out of the courtroom, he turned and shouted, "Life over death." An ironic thing to say coming from a man who took 5 lives. Henry's mother, Jewel, once told reporters, Henry never made it back home, and he didn't, but he died doing something good, something selfless, something that mattered. Henry wasn't just a man with a troubled past. He was someone with heart, with courage, and in the end, with faith. James Lee Appleton was born on November 14, 1957 in Merriam, Kansas, to Jack and Gwen Appleton. He was the kind of man who made an impression, not by being loud or flashy, but by being solid, steady, and kind. People who knew him described him as smart, soft-spoken, and devoted to the people he loved. He believed in hard work and lived that belief every day. After graduating from Southwest High School in 1975, James built a long, dependable career. He spent more than 27 years as a supervisor at Emerson Electric, then transitioned into carpentry for 12 more. Eventually, he joined the Gateway Rural Water Authority. By then, he'd settled into the quiet town of Garfield, Arkansas, a place he loved. He wasn't just doing a job, he was helping keep his community running. That's who James was. But on the morning of February 23, 2017, his life was cut short in a sudden and violent act. James was sitting in his work truck, talking to his brother-in-law, who at the time was the mayor of Gateway, when a car pulled up beside him. Without warning, a man raised a gun and fired a single shot through the window, striking James in the face. By the time first responders arrived, it was too late. James was gone. The town was stunned, and the man arrested for the murder that made it even harder to comprehend. It was someone the community knew, someone who used to wear a badge, Grant Matthew Harden. Harden wasn't a stranger. He'd served in multiple law enforcement agencies across northwest Arkansas, Fayetteville, Huntsville, Eureka Springs. In early 2016, he'd even been hired as the police chief of Gateway, but resigned just a few months later. He'd also served 2 terms as a constable in Benton County, and at the time of the murder was working as a corrections officer at the Northwest Arkansas Community Corrections Center, a women's facility. But Harden's experience didn't protect him from suspicion. In fact, it raised more red flags. Witnesses had seen the shooting, and Harden's own wife told investigators she assumed he'd been out in the yard at the time, which meant he had no alibi. There's still no confirmed motive. Some believed there had been tension between James and Harden, due to their roles in the small-town government. But when Harden appeared in court on October 16, 2017, he refused to explain. All he said was, "I don't know how to say it, but I'm sorry." He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and received a 30-year sentence. And that might have been the end of it, if not for what happened next. After his conviction, Harden's DNA was entered into the system, and it matched a cold case from 1997. A brutal calculated sexual assault at an elementary school in Rogers, Arkansas. Back then, a teacher had stayed behind after school to prepare her classroom. While over 250 people attended a church service in the cafeteria, she was attacked at gunpoint in the bathroom. The assailant sexually assaulted her there, then again in her classroom. He wore a stocking cap, sunglasses, and no shoes. He covered her face and carefully avoided leaving evidence behind. Police always suspected he might have law enforcement training, but the case went cold. In 2003, investigators filed a John Doe warrant, just as the statute of limitations was about to run out. And in 2017, when DNA was collected from Harden after his murder conviction, it matched. In February 2019, Harden pleaded guilty to 2 counts of sexual assault and was sentenced to 50 more years, 25 for each count. Combined with the 30-year murder sentence, he wouldn't even be eligible for parole until serving 21 years for the murder and 14 years for the sexual assaults. But then, somehow, he escaped. On May 25, 2025, Grant Harden walked out of the North Central Unit in Calico Rock. He was wearing a fake uniform that looked enough like a corrections officer's outfit to fool someone. Surveillance videos showed him walking through a secure Sally Port around 2:55 p.m. A staff member opened the gate without verifying his identity with a fake uniform and the demeanor of a law enforcement officer with experience. He was gone. The manhunt that followed was one of the largest Arkansas has seen in years. The FBI quickly offered a $10,000 reward, which was raised to $20,000. The U.S. Marshals added another $5,000. Law enforcement swarmed the region. Arkansas State Police, Border Patrol, Game and Fish, local sheriff's departments all joined in. Drones were launched. Tracking dogs picked up his trail. Roads were shut down. Harden had deep ties to the area. Garfield, Pea Ridge, all across Benton County. He knew the terrain and he knew how law enforcement worked. That made him especially dangerous. Former Eureka Springs Police Chief Jim Hyatt wasn't surprised. He tried to fire Harden back in 1996 for lying on a police report and using excessive force. Instead, Harden resigned. Hyatt later told reporters, was abusive, excessive, and had a very bad temper. He was dangerous, Others in the community shared stories of Hardin chasing people down, running them off the road, even pulling a gun on someone. He wasn't just violent, was calculating. 13 days after the escape, on June 7, 2025, authorities found him hiding near Moccasin Creek, less than 2 miles from the prison. Tracking dogs had picked up his scent. His identity was confirmed by fingerprint. He was taken back into custody and charged with second-degree escape. Investigators are still trying to determine whether he had help. One of the people most impacted by that escape was Cheryl Tillman, James Appleton's sister and the current mayor of Gateway. On May 25th, she was at home when her phone started blowing up. When she finally checked her messages, she saw the alert. Grant Hardin had escaped. She said it felt like her heart just stopped. Cheryl was serving on the Gateway City Council at the time of the murder, alongside her twin sister. Her husband Andrew was mayor. Now she leads the town, and once again, she's left trying to hold everything together. She described Hardin as angry and evil with a long history of violence. She admitted she was scared, not just for herself, but for her whole family in her community. While she praised local law enforcement, including Benton County and the Pea Ridge officers, she had harsh words for the state. "The only thing we heard was a phone call from the automated victim alert system," she said. "Nobody from the Department of Corrections ever called us. Not once." She was frustrated, and rightly so. As of July 2025, Hardin remains in custody, facing additional time for the escape. And while authorities work to determine what went wrong, victims like the Appleton family are left trying to process the trauma all over again. Louisa Dunn was a 75-year-old widow living a quiet life alone at 58 Britannia Road in the Easton area of Bristol. Born in 1892, she had been widowed twice and, over time, retreated into a life of solitude. Her days were simple, filled with cups of tea, memories of once active life in labor politics, and the comfort of books stacked around her modest home. She found peace in that quiet routine. But on the evening of June 27, 1967, that peace was violently interrupted. That night, several neighbors reported hearing something unsettling. A scream, short and sharp, then suddenly muffled. One described it as a crying out. Another said it was frightening, like someone being attacked. But when they looked outside, the street was still, no one was in sight. With no obvious signs of trouble, nothing more was done. The next morning, Louisa's neighbors grew concerned when she didn't appear outside like she normally did. One of them, Allen, climbed onto the windowsill of Louisa's house and peered inside. She saw her lying motionless on the floor. At first, she thought Louisa had suffered a heart attack, but when she touched her hand, she said it was as cold as ice. Louisa had been sexually assaulted and murdered in her own living room. The pathologist later determined she died from asphyxiation, strangled with a scarf with force applied to her mouth. There were bruises around her neck, cuts on her chin, and injuries consistent with a violent assault. At the time, the case triggered one of the largest investigations in Bristol's history. Over 19,000 sets of fingerprints and palm prints were compared to the one lifted from the window, believed to be the point of entry. More than 8,000 people were interviewed, but no match was found, and eventually the case went cold. What no one knew, not even Louisa's family, was that a tiny scrap of cloth would someday change everything. Louisa was wearing a blue skirt the night she was murdered. Investigators preserved it, even as years turned into decades. And in 2023, a new cold case team from Avon and Somerset Police decided to take another look. Forensic experts screened the skirt for traces of semen using modern techniques that didn't exist back in the 60s. After testing the back of the garment, boxed away for more than half a century, scientists detected sperm cells. From those, they generated a full DNA profile. That DNA was uploaded to the UK's national database. The match, Ryland Headley, a 92-year-old man living quietly in Ipswich. He had come to Britain from Jamaica in the 1950s and lived in Bristol at the time of Louisa's murder. Records placed him just under 2 miles from Louisa's home in 1967, but shortly after the murder, he left the area. In 1977, 10 years after Louisa's death, Headley committed 2 brutal sexual assaults in Ipswich. He broke into the homes of 2 elderly widows, one 84, the other 79, threatened to kill them and attack them in the darkness. During one of the assaults, the victim pleaded with him, "Haven't you got a mother?" He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. But shockingly, an appeals court reduced his sentence to just 7 years. A psychiatrist had testified that the attacks were due to sexual frustration caused by his demanding wife, and the court accepted it. Headley served only about 2 years before being released in 1980. For the next 43 years, he blended back into society undetected, hiding a monstrous secret. It wasn't until November 2024 that detectives knocked on the door of his Ipswich home and arrested him for Louisa's murder. No, you can't come now, I'm just coming now. Where you want to come in from? I'll explain because it's a bit sensitive, so we'd like to come in and speak to you properly, please. I come in to speak to you properly? I mean, I just got up. I'm a little low. I'm sorry, it's quite early. I'm very sick, not really told. You're not well? No. Okay. What is this about? I'll tell you inside, because we don't want other people hearing. So can we just come in and get you seated? Thank you very much. Is Mr. Headley, yes? Mr. Headley? Yeah. Rylan Headley, lovely. Thank you very much. This is my colleague Joe. We've just got a camera recording as well. Just so I'm here today because I'm arresting you on suspicion of the rape and murder of Louisa Dunn, which happened in Bristol in June 1967. The reason I'm arresting you is because the police have investigative material that indicates you are responsible for that rape and murder of Mrs. Dunn, which happened at Britannia Road in eastern Bristol, June 1967. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defense if you do not mention when questioned something that you later align in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. I need to do this. We have investigative information, so we have material that suggests that it's yourself, and we need to basically arrest you and take you to the custody so that we can conduct an interview with you so we can hear your event and interview you about it. Interview what? Interview you about it and get your account. That palm print found on her window all those years ago, one that had been checked against nearly 20,000 people, was now confirmed to be his. And that wasn't all. He'd been asked to give a palm print during an unrelated 2012 investigation, but refused, claiming arthritis prevented him from bending his wrist. At trial, Headley showed little emotion. Now in his 90s, frail and soft-spoken, he pled not guilty. But the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the palm print, his proximity to the crime, his history. For fingerprint experts testified that the palm print from Louisa's window matched Headley's hypothenar region just beneath the pinky finger. After nearly 10 hours of deliberation, on June 30th, 2025, the jury found Rylan Headley guilty of the sexual assault and murder of Louisa Dunn. The following day, July 1st, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. But there was something unusual about the sentence, something tied to the era in which the crime was committed. Because Louisa's murder happened in 1967, the court was bound by the sentencing laws of that time, not the laws in place today. Prior to 2003, it wasn't the judge who set the minimum term for life sentences. It was the Home Secretary in consultation with the trial judge and the Lord Chief Justice. As a result, the court had very few examples to go by. In fact, the only relevant case they found involved a burglar convicted of murdering 2 people who was given a 20-year minimum term. Today, a sexually motivated murder like Louisa's would typically carry a minimum of 30 years. But because of how sentencing worked in 1967, Justice Sweeting had to base Headley's punishment on what would have been imposed then. Still, he made one thing clear regardless of the number. Rylan Headley would never walk free again. He was 35 years old at the time of the murder and lived free until now at the age of 92. With this conviction, Headley became the oldest person in British history to be found guilty of murder. The only surviving member of Louisa's family, her granddaughter Mary Dayton, sat just a few feet away from him in court. She later said she felt a deep, unexplainable connection to her grandmother and that the same DNA that caught him was also part of her. Headley was born in the West Indies in September 1932 and immigrated to the UK in 1952. By 1958, he was married with 3 children and living in Bristol. After Louise's murder, he moved just beyond the original search radius, eventually settling in Ipswich. But by the early 70s, he was working as a railway machinist and committing a string of burglaries and other offenses. Between 1973 and 1978, he admitted to at least 10 burglaries in Ipswich. Now, in the wake of his 2025 conviction, police in Suffolk and Norfolk have begun reviewing unsolved sexual assaults and murders of elderly women from the 1970s and 80s. Among the cases now under renewed scrutiny, the killings of Edna Harvey in 1984, Doris Shelley in 1993, and Karen Hales also in 1993. Stephen Kilwain was born on September 10, 1941 in Dickinson, North Dakota, to Martin and Annie Kilwain. He grew up in a working-class home and eventually graduated from Dickinson State College with degrees in art and business. Those who knew him best described Stephen as warm, funny, and deeply compassionate. A man who didn't just talk about helping people. He actually did. He married Judith Pavlicek on April 14, 1964, and together they raised 5 children. Stephen was the kind of dad who made you laugh with a dry joke, but always showed up when it mattered. He adored his kids and grandkids, and never missed a chance to dote on them. His professional life was as impressive as it was varied. Early in his career, he taught English for the Job Corps and later became a drug and alcohol counselor at the State Hospital in Jamestown. That work left a deep impression on him. He believed in second chances and practiced what he preached, hiring those struggling with addiction, helping people find footing when they had none, and even welcoming some into his home. By the late 60s, Stephen pivoted to banking as a loan officer at Liberty Bank, all while feeding his creative side as a painter. Eventually, he realized painting steeples paid better than painting landscapes, and he leaned into real estate and construction. Through the 70s and 80s, he built homes, developed subdivisions, and left his mark on Dickinson. Many locals still remember the businesses he ran: Kilwain Construction, Kilwain Lumber, the Carpet Castle, the Mint Bar, as well as commercial spaces like Mr. Steak and Happy Joe's. He even co-owned a gold mine in Virginia City, Montana. In 1986, Stephen and Judy moved to Bozeman, Montana. He kept building, kept creating, and never stopped remodeling his 1910 home. After Judy passed away in 2019, Stephen split his time between Bozeman and Broomfield, Colorado, where his youngest daughter lived. He lived a peaceful life and he didn't have enemies. But on Sunday, June 13, 2021, everything changed. Stephen was found murdered inside his home around 11 a.m. in his red and white house on the corner of 9th and Mendenhall in Bozeman. And tragically, he wasn't even supposed to be there. He had planned to be in Denver that weekend, but a long-awaited doctor's appointment had been rescheduled, so he stayed home. The night before, he spoke to his oldest son, Kurt. They laughed and said goodnight with an "love you." The next day, calls and texts went unanswered. At first, the family brushed it off, but as the day wore on, the silence became unsettling. A message in the family group chat, "Has anyone talked to Dad today?" was met with radio silence. That wasn't like him. He usually talked to at least one of them every single day. Fearing he may have tripped or fallen, the family requested a welfare check. Officers arrived and found Stephen in the kitchen, in front of the refrigerator, lying in a large pool of blood. Initially, the coroner told the family that Stephen had been electrocuted, which shocked the family because he had worked in construction for over 50 years. He knew how to handle wiring. The only exposed wires in the house were near a light switch that controlled a ceiling light. It didn't make sense, and it didn't make sense to the medical examiner either. Within days, the story changed. The autopsy revealed Stephen hadn't been electrocuted. He'd been murdered. Also, both the front door and the bedroom door had been forced open. Still, no weapon had been found. It wasn't until they received the death certificate that the horrifying truth became clear. Stephen had suffered multiple chop-type wounds. The word chopping was used, broad enough to include a cleaver, axe, hatchet, or even a hammer. And since Stephen had been remodeling, there were tools all over the house. According to the certificate, the estimated time of death was 11:20 a.m. That same Sunday morning, church services were taking place next door. People were walking by on sidewalks. The neighborhood was busy. How could someone walk into his house, kill him so violently, and walk out unnoticed? It didn't even look like a robbery because Stephen had just sold his Suburban for $2,400 in cash, and the money was still in his wallet along with his credit cards. Expensive tools were untouched. Nothing obvious had been taken. Then came the key piece of evidence: a cell phone found in Stephen's front yard. It didn't belong to him. It belonged to 25-year-old Austin John Close, a former Bozeman High football player and recent graduate of Montana State University. When detectives questioned Close, he claimed he lost the phone walking home drunk from the bars. He said he never entered Stephen's home and offered to give a DNA sample, then changed his mind the next day after speaking with family and a lawyer. The case stalled, but the detectives kept working. In November 2021, they collected trash from Close's residence. Inside was mail, receipts, and a used water bottle. That bottle was sent to the Montana State Crime Lab, and it changed everything. Close's DNA from the bottle matched DNA found on Stephen's pajama bottoms. Additional DNA was recovered from under Stephen's fingernails. According to the lab, the results were staggering. Cell tower data also placed Close's phone at the scene of the crime between 12:15 and 1 a.m. that morning. A neighbor later reported hearing raised voices around 2 a.m., 3 people talking loudly, a loud crash, and then someone saying, "Shit." On July 9, 2024, more than 3 years after Stephen's murder, police arrested Austin Close and charged him with deliberate homicide. He was booked into the Gallatin County Detention Center on a $1 million bond. He made his first court appearance on July 11, 2025, in Gallatin County Justice Court, where the charge was formally read. His next court date is set for July 25, 2025, for pretrial proceedings in Gallatin County District Court. Stephen Kilwain lived a full, generous life. He built homes, gave people second chances, and raised a family rooted in love. His murder was brutal and senseless, and it left his children and grandchildren grasping for answers in the wake of unimaginable loss. He showed up for everything, every school play, every sports game, every graduation. He was supposed to walk his grandson into kindergarten. That never happened, and his grandson still cries for him, not even knowing the full truth, just that grandpa is gone. This case is still unfolding, and even with an arrest, what his family really wants is the full truth and justice. Carol Sue Ward was born in Texas and raised with a strong sense of family. In 1970, she married a U.S. Air Force soldier, William Mahaffey. They had one child together, a little boy named Lindale, born in 1972. But the marriage didn't last. After the divorce, Carol eventually remarried. In the summer of 1976, she married James Ronald Skidmore, a carpenter from Sealy, Texas. He had children from a previous marriage. She did too, and together they tried to start fresh. But something wasn't working. So in the spring of '77, the young family, Carol, James, and 5-year-old Lynn, set off on a trip to Rossville, Georgia, where James's parents lived. They told friends and family the purpose was to put their marriage back together. Carol's parents, John and Clara Ward, weren't entirely convinced. James told them they were flying to Tennessee for a week, but they'd driven. The last time the Wards heard Carol's voice was April 8th. She called and told them she wasn't sure when they'd be back. She didn't sound right, and then nothing. Clara Ward said later, "I had a feeling something was wrong then." Carol had this big German shepherd where they lived in Sealy, and she wouldn't just go away and leave it like that. April 9th came and went, and so did Carol. On May 5th, a fisherman made a grim discovery at Parksville Lake in the Cherokee National Forest in southeastern Tennessee. It was the body of a young boy, wrapped in a plastic bag and weighed down with a 40-pound rock. At the time, Carol's parents didn't even know a child's body had been found. It wasn't until May 8th, after talking to James' family in Georgia, that they even realized authorities were investigating. And even then, they didn't believe it was Lynn. Clara remembered police telling them the body had already been identified and buried on March 22nd. They were confused, even relieved, hoping maybe this wasn't their grandson. But it was. The FBI confirmed it on June 13th. 5-year-old Lynn Del Mojave had been murdered. Just days before that confirmation on June 1st, James Ronald Skidmore was found dead in a motel room in Harrison, Arkansas. He'd taken his own life with a drug overdose. A suicide note was found nearby. It read, "Things aren't working out too good for me." With James dead and Lynn buried in Tennessee, Carol's whereabouts remained a mystery. Her parents held out hope for a while. "We're just wondering if anyone is looking for Carol," Clara said in an interview that summer. "We know she has to be dead. She was so close to Lynn. She did love him so. Anyone who wanted to get to him would have had to get her first." The wards made repeated calls to authorities, but said all they got was second and third-hand information. They couldn't even get Lynn's death certificate to bring his body home. They had to accept the FBI's word. Clara even recalled a report about false teeth found near the lake. James wore dentures, but no one ever confirmed whether those were linked to him. Then 3 years later, in 1980, 3 hunters walking through a wooded patch of land north of Fountain, Florida, came across a shallow grave near Highway 231. Inside were the skeletal remains of a woman. She'd clearly met with foul play. The damage to her clothing was obvious. But her identity? That was anyone's guess. Investigators suspected it might be Joan Benner, a 21-year-old mother of 2 who had gone missing in 1976. The remains were sent to Florida State University's anthropology lab, but Joanne was eventually ruled out. Her injuries didn't match, and just like that, the woman in the woods became Jane Doe, and that's all she would remain for more than 4 decades. It wasn't until 2024 that the Bay County Sheriff's Cold Case and Crime Scene units decided to take another look. They submitted a tooth from the remains to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. The DNA profile was entered into CODAs, and it hit. 2 matches came back, siblings in Texas. They had submitted their DNA 8 years earlier, hoping for a miracle. And after a kinship analysis confirmed the relationship, it was officially announced in June 2025. The woman in the grave was Carol Sue Skidmore. 45 years after she vanished, Carol finally had her name back. The full story, long speculated, now confirmed, was devastating. James Skidmore had murdered both his wife and her child. He dumped Lynn's body in a Tennessee lake. He buried Carol in a shallow Florida grave. Then he drove to Arkansas and ended his own life in a motel room. 3 states, 3 lives, 1 man's brutal unraveling. The tragedy didn't end there. Lynn's biological father, William Mahaffey, was killed in a fiery car crash just months later. Within a year, every member of that little family, father, mother, and child, was gone. Carol's surviving brother, after decades of waiting, finally got the call. It brought closure, but not comfort. And what solved it? A single tooth, a determined cold case team, and the kind of modern DNA analysis that can finally do what the past could not. Give families the answers they've waited lifetimes for. Marlon Wade Reese was 36 years old, a husband, a father of 3, and living just south of Dallas in Red Oak, Texas, with his wife Amy and their children. To most, it probably looked like a quiet working-class life, but behind the closed doors of their modest mobile home, something was deeply wrong. It was December 2012 when Wade's mother, Susanna Osbiel, and her husband Terry drove out to check on him. They hadn't heard from him in weeks. That silence, it wasn't like him. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. Inside the home, Wade's decomposing body was stuffed inside a large green trash bin, his feet sticking out through the doorway, hands and feet bound, a bag over his head. It was clear someone had tried and failed to dispose of him. And just as disturbing, Amy and the kids were gone. Ellis County investigators were shaken. Even seasoned detectives hadn't seen anything quite like it. "I've worked multiple homicides before," said investigator Joe Fitzgerald. "But this one was unique. Shocking. You could tell they'd tried to fit his body completely in the trash can, like they were taking out the garbage." Wade had been dead for weeks, shot twice in the head, likely killed in October. About 2 months before he was discovered, investigators quickly turned their attention to his wife Amy. Was she a victim too, or had she orchestrated this? A search warrant led them to a storage unit the couple had rented. There, employees recalled seeing Amy and the children not long after the estimated time of Wade's murder. She came and went from the unit while the kids waited nearby. That sighting made things clear. Amy wasn't missing. She was on the run. Back at the crime scene, detectives found more than just Wade's body. A second trash bin held gloves, a respirator mask, borax, carpet deodorizer, and contract-grade trash bags, along with fingerprints. They believed the mask had been worn to block the stench of decomposition. Inside the storage unit, more evidence. Blood-stained bedding and clothes, including a pair of camo cargo shorts, smeared with blood along the waistband. They also recovered several firearms. "We were actually shocked all that evidence was just sitting there in trash bags," said investigator Katie Cheek. "We didn't think it would be that easy." They also discovered that Amy had pulled the kids out of school back on October 15th, citing a family emergency. 2 months had passed. They had to act fast. A DMV search finally hit. Amy had gotten a new license in the Denver area. Enrollment records at local schools confirmed it. The children were alive, enrolled, and living in Colorado. It wasn't long before Denver police tracked Amy down. She didn't hide. In fact, she spoke openly with investigators. They said she was calm, cooperative, not what you'd expect from a homicide suspect. Amy claimed she left Texas to escape Wade, that he'd been abusive, violent toward the children, especially their daughter. She said she fled after a fight in which Wade allegedly threw the girl to the floor. As investigators dug deeper, Amy's story began to unravel. Digital forensics told another story. Messages, search history, online activity. It painted a picture of a woman living a double life, engaged in sexually explicit chats and forums just days after Wade's death. She was ready to start a new life with someone else. She said she was tired of her relationship with Wade. Prosecutors later revealed that Amy hadn't just committed the murder. She'd planned it, and horrifyingly, she'd enlisted the help of her 12-year-old daughter, who had special needs. Wade was shot while he slept. Their 3 children, ages 12, 8, and 4, were all home in the trailer at the time. After the killing, Amy showered, gathered the bloody evidence, and drove her children to Walmart in Waxahachie, where she bought supplies to clean up and dispose of her husband's body. The financial records matched her purchases to the exact items found at the scene. Boxes, gloves, trash bags. When confronted with this, Amy requested an attorney and stopped answering questions. But the evidence was overwhelming. In April 2015, Amy Reese pleaded guilty to the murder of her husband. She stood before an Ellis County jury, hoping for mercy. But that hope vanished quickly once prosecutors laid out the full picture. Her CPS history, the abuse allegations, the manipulation, the murder. Jurors learned that Child Protective Services had removed her children back in 2009 after Amy assaulted Wade and was found to have neglected her kids. The children were placed in foster care for 6 months before being returned. Amy had also been previously investigated for physically abusing her eldest daughter. Despite it all, despite the years of history, Wade tried to keep the family together, and it cost him his life. Amy showed no remorse during trial, no apology to Wade's family, no regret for what her children saw and endured. In the end, the jury sentenced her to life in prison. She won't be eligible for parole until she's served at least 30 years. That would be around 2014. Maureen Hunsaker was just 26 years old, a mother of 3, a wife, a daughter. She was just doing what so many young women do, working hard, sacrificing, and trying to build a better life for the people she loved most. Born on February 28, 1959 in Seattle, Washington, Maureen was the daughter of Clyde and Betty Sudwick. By her mid-20s, she'd made a home in Utah with her husband Michael and their 3 little boys, Asen, Hayden, and Matt. The youngest was just 6 months old. Maureen worked the night shift at a gasomat in Cairns. Long hours, low pay, quiet, and lonely. But she showed up every time because her family depended on her. And then came February 23, 1986, a Sunday night, cold, quiet, routine. Maureen clocked in like usual, slipped into the booth. The radio played softly. Her coat hung nearby. But by 9:50 p.m., something wasn't right. Customers were lining up at the window, waiting to pay. But the booth was empty. Maureen was gone. No sign of a struggle. No forced entry. Just gone. Then around 11:05 p.m., the phone rang. It was Maureen. She told her husband she'd been robbed and kidnapped. But she said she was okay. That the man told her he was going to let her go. A sheriff's deputy happened to be with her husband at the time and briefly spoke with her too. He asked where she was. She couldn't say, or maybe she wouldn't. Then the line went dead. 2 days later, February 25th, a hiker made a discovery in Big Cottonwood Canyon near the Storm Mountain picnic area. It was Maureen. She had been tied to a tree, strangled. Her throat cut from ear to ear. Her purse was missing. Her ID was gone. But later that same evening, miles away, something strange turned up at the Salt Lake County Jail. A jailer found a stack of driver's license stuffed inside a drawer. One of them belonged to Maureen Hunsaker. They'd been hidden in a changing room hamper by a man who had just been arrested the day before on an unrelated burglary charge. His name was Ralph Leroy Menzies. No one knew it yet, but they were looking at the man who had just committed one of the most cold-blooded murders in Utah history. Menzies was a violent career criminal. He'd once escaped from prison. He'd shot a cab driver during a failed carjacking. In just days before Maureen's murder, he'd been released on bail for stealing Christmas decorations. The evidence came quickly. 2 teenagers came forward. They'd seen a man and woman together at Storm Mountain the same day Maureen vanished. The car, they described, a cream-colored 1974 Chevy, matched the one Menzies had borrowed from a friend. Maureen's fingerprint was found inside. Detectives searched Menzies' apartment. They found her purse. A jailhouse informant said Menzies bragged about the murder, said slitting her throat had been one of the biggest thrills of his life. According to prosecutors, Menzies abducted Maureen at gunpoint, stole $116 from the register, let her make one final phone call to create a false sense of hope, then drove her 16 miles out to the canyon. There, he tied her to a tree, sexually assaulted her, strangled her. In 1988, Menzies was convicted of capital homicide and aggravated kidnapping. He waived a jury for sentencing. The judge sentenced him to death. But for Maureen's family, justice didn't come that day. It didn't come the next year or the next decade. In 1994, the Utah Supreme Court upheld his conviction. But in 2006, the court ruled Menzies could start his appeals all over again because his original attorney didn't do an adequate job. Just like that, everything reset. Back to 1988. For Maureen's son Matt, that ruling was devastating. He was only 10 years old when his mother was murdered. But he remembers her laugh, her warmth, the way she always made it to his baseball games. Matt has become a quiet but relentless voice, testifying before lawmakers, standing in court, showing up to every hearing, every delay, every headline that seems to forget Maureen altogether. In 2023, Utah finally ruled that Menzies had exhausted all appeals. But his lawyers weren't done. This time, they claimed he had advanced dementia and could no longer understand why he was being put to death. In June 2025, Judge Matthew Bates reviewed the evidence and ruled that Menzies was still lucid, still rational, still understood the punishment that awaited him. He was declared competent. Still, his defense team filed again, this time with a new expert report. They argued he now relied on oxygen, used a wheelchair, had deteriorated so much they claimed that he didn't even comprehend his legal situation anymore. Judge Bates acknowledged the motion, but it wasn't enough to stop what was already in motion. A date had been set, September 5, 2025. Ralph Menzies, now 67, chose to die by firing squad, a method Utah still allows for inmates sentenced before 2004. If carried out, it would be the state's first firing squad execution since 2010, and only the 6th in the United States since 1977. Matt Hunsaker plans to be there with his brother, his father, and his son. But one person will be missing. Maureen's mother, Matt's grandmother, Betty, passed away in 2021. She had waited decades to see justice done. Matt's biggest fear that Menzies' failing health or changes in the law could open a door. That parole might one day be back on the table. That illegal loophole might give him another out. These are questions that keep me up at night, Matt says. He's waited almost 40 years. And now with the clock finally ticking, he just wants it to end. It's not about vengeance, he says. It's about justice. It's about closure. It's about never forgetting who this was really about, because at the center of all the filings and delays and arguments is a young mother, a woman named Maureen, who went to work one night and never came home. Alexia Brianna Alexander was born on January 13, 2008 in Brandon, and went by Lexi. And by the time she turned 4, she'd already been passed through 5 foster homes in just 6 months. No routine, no comfort, no place to call her own. But then she met Ashley. Ashley Alexander had been fostering her for 2 years. When she made it permanent, she adopted her. From that day forward, Lexi finally had something she'd never really known. Someone who chose her and meant it. By 14, she and Ashley were living in Tampa. On the outside, things looked okay. But underneath, Lexi was still struggling, and no one, not even Ashley, could have known just how little time was left. It was just before sunrise on May 6, 2022, when Tampa police responded to reports of gunfire along Florabraska Avenue in Tampa Heights. Neighbors said they heard 8 shots. When officers got there, they found the body of a teenage girl lying near the edge of the road. No ID, no phone, just a small tattoo. Later that day, police shared a photo of the tattoo, hoping someone might recognize it. Ashley did. She was scrolling through the news when she saw it, and in that moment, she knew. That was her daughter. Lexi was gone. Police say she was taken to a vacant lot off Florabraska Avenue and shot. Ronnie Walker, 44 years old, was charged with capital murder. But what still isn't fully clear is how Lexi ended up in that car at 3 a.m. She'd run away from home many times before, but this time she didn't make it back. Walker wasn't a stranger to the system. Back in 2003, he broke into a home where a woman named Veronica Denson lived with her grandmother. He demanded money from the grandmother's boyfriend and then shot and killed her. He was convicted of manslaughter and armed robbery, sentenced to life in prison, but his lawyers got the conviction overturned, arguing hearsay evidence had been used improperly. Walker got a new deal just 5 years behind bars, and now another girl was dead. A second man, 33-year-old Robert Creed, was also arrested in Lexi's case. Police say he was in the car with Walker that night. He's been charged as an accessory after the fact. Detectives pulled Lexi's phone records and placed her in the vehicle around the time of the shooting. DNA evidence confirmed she'd been there. Thousands of messages between her and Walker were uncovered. Messages filled with manipulation, coaching, secrecy, and the question that still echoes: what was a 14-year-old girl doing with 2 adult men in the middle of the night? If you looked at her social media, Lexi came off like any other teen, bright, bold, obsessed with music, makeup, and dogs. But behind the selfies, she was hurting. Ashley saw the signs up close. She'd mess up, she said, then panic, begging me, please don't send me back. Ashley never would have, but that fear ran deep. Lexi had questions about who she was, about the people who'd brought her into the world, and then disappeared. Sometimes she'd lash out, scream, "You're not my real mom." Ashley knew that came from pain, not truth. Just before Christmas 2019, when Lexi was 12, Ashley tracked down her birth mom on Facebook. They planned to meet at a restaurant, but no one showed up. Neither parent came. Ashley knew what was coming. She cried. She screamed. She broke down, and I was the only one there to take it. After that, something in Lexi changed. She started running away, sleeping in parks, vanishing for days. Cops brought her home more times than Ashley could count. Eventually, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. She was placed in state programs, a specialized school, but nothing seemed to reach her. Then came the messages from older men, late-night DMs, gifts, secrecy, grooming. One of those men was Ronnie Walker. He bought her drinks, took her to secluded places, told her to lie, told her to keep quiet. It wasn't love. It was control. and no one stopped him. On the morning of May 6th, around 3 a.m., Walker drove Lexi to a dark stretch of road in Temple Terrace. There, inside the car, he shot her multiple times in the head, face, chest. After dumping her body, Walker cleaned the car and tossed the gun into a river. Detectives later uncovered thousands of messages between Walker and Lexi. They showed a pattern of grooming, manipulation, calculated control. A grown man taking advantage of a vulnerable 14-year-old girl. In court, Walker showed no emotion when the verdict came down. Guilty of first-degree murder. At sentencing, he turned to the family and said, "I didn't kill her, you know that, but the evidence was overwhelming." His defense claimed Robert Creed was the real shooter, but 2 adult men, 1 child, and no one did a damn thing to stop it. Ashley took the stand. She told them about Lexi's dreams, how she wanted to be a fashion designer or a lawyer. She spoke of a girl who loved hard, even when she hurt harder. Today, Lexi's bedroom still looks like she might walk back in. Ashley hasn't touched it. While showing a reporter the room, she found a folded-up drawing, a note. It said, "Dear Mother, you were always there for me." She couldn't say it out loud, Ashley said, "But now I know. She knew I loved her. I never gave up on her, even when she gave up on herself." Now, Lexi's ashes sit in a small urn in the living room. Kaylin Leslie Whitaker was born on October 12, 1994 in Terre Haute, Indiana, to David Whitaker and Leslie Roberts. From the start, she was full of promise, a vibrant soul who had everything ahead of her. At just 20 years old, she was engaged to Connor Scott, a man she'd known since high school. The two lived together in the basement of his parents' house in Martinsville, Illinois. But on Halloween night in 2014, that promise was shattered. Connor claimed he woke up to the sound of a gunshot. He said he found Kaylin lying in bed, dead from a gunshot wound. Authorities first thought it might be self-inflicted, but something didn't sit right. Kaylin was right-handed. The gunshot wound was on the left side of her head. Forensic pathologist Dr. Roland Kaur at first listed the cause of death as undetermined, but after more tests, the truth became undeniable. This was murder. Leslie, Kaylin's mother, never believed the suicide claim. She knew her daughter. She was a bright, passionate young woman who loved life. The idea that Kaylin would end it all just didn't make sense. So with no answers, Leslie and her husband Dave took their fight to the media. They needed answers, and they wouldn't stop until they got them. Meanwhile, Connor, who'd been on and off with Kaylin since high school, was showing troubling signs. He had a controlling side. Friends noticed it. Family noticed it. Kaylin, once a woman full of energy and ambition, was now becoming a shadow of herself. She was withdrawing. Connor didn't like her spending time with her friends, and Leslie had raised concerns when Kaylin decided to move in with him while still attending college. But her daughter was headstrong and had made her choice. Then, shockingly, nearly 2 years after Kaylin's death, Connor Scott walked into the police station in Danville and confessed. His confession came just weeks after a disturbing incident. Connor had threatened to shoot himself after a breakup with a different girlfriend. Police had seized a loaded gun from him, and now Connor was ready to talk. In his taped confession, he admitted to killing Kaylin. He said it happened after an argument. In a fit of rage, under the influence of meth, he shot her. He didn't know why. He just did. And after the shot, overwhelmed with emotion, he punched holes in the wall in frustration. For Kaylin's family, hearing those words, "I killed Kaylin Whitaker," was both a relief and a heartbreak. It was the truth, but it didn't bring Kaylin back. Connors was sentenced to 37 years in prison under a plea deal, but no sentence could ever give Kaylin back the life she was robbed of. Joshua Murray was born on November 8, 1981 in Tuscumbia, Alabama. By the time he was 37, he'd settled in Iberia, Missouri, where he was a loving husband, father, and a well-respected member of his community. He worked as a construction supervisor at Perini Construction and was deeply involved in his church, Curry Community Church. He was the kind of guy who worked hard for his family and the people around him. On June 12, 2003, Josh married Amy Prater, a day that marked the start of what seemed like a bright future together. But tragically, less than 15 years later, their world would fall apart in the most unexpected way. On December 11, 2018, Josh's life came to a sudden and violent end in a house fire that at first seemed like an accident. But as the investigation unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just a tragic event. It was a crime. Police discovered that he had already died before the fire even started. An autopsy revealed high levels of anaphylaxis in his system, a deadly poison. The fire had been intentionally set with an accelerant, confirming that his death was no accident. What followed was a chilling investigation that revealed a dark truth. Police discovered that Josh's wife had been in regular contact with Eugene Claypool, a convicted murderer serving a life sentence at the Jefferson City Correctional Center. A nurse at the prison, she'd been secretly communicating with Claypool, telling him about her desire to be with him. Their phone calls were recorded, and in them, Amy spoke openly about wanting to be free of her husband. She even told Claypool that they could get married after Josh was out of the picture. This shocking information led to Amy's arrest 3 months after his death. As the case moved forward, Amy's defense team argued that Josh might have taken his own life by drinking the antifreeze, but the judge dismissed that theory. Fast forward 6 years, and on June 25, 2025, Amy entered an Alford plea, a legal move that let her maintain her innocence, but acknowledged the prosecution had enough evidence to convict. In return, the prosecution dropped the charge of armed criminal action. Amy was sentenced to 12 years for second-degree murder, 7 years for arson, and 4 years for tampering with evidence. The sentences will run concurrently, meaning she'll serve a maximum of 12 years in prison. While Amy's sentence might seem light, the pain of losing Josh is anything but. His family, his father James, his sister Jennifer, his son Braden, and the rest of his loved ones are left to cope with the loss of a good, faithful husband and father. The long wait for justice has been a tough journey for Josh's family, but through it all, they've remained strong. While his tragic death is an incredibly painful chapter in their lives, it doesn't define who Josh was or the love he left behind. Laura Sardinia was born on September 26, 1994, and by 2020, at just 25 years old, she was working hard to turn her life around in Santa Ana, California. After a tough past, she was determined to create a better future. She was going for an online psychology degree, hoping to get a fresh start. Even though a 2019 motorcycle accident had left her with some pretty serious physical limitations, including losing fine motor skills that made simple tasks like chopping lemons nearly impossible, she wasn't letting it stop her. She even got a $750,000 settlement from the accident. And what did she do with it? She gave $100,000 of it to her abusive boyfriend, Craig Sharon, hoping he'd just disappear. But that's not how it went. Laura tried breaking up with Craig more times than anyone could count. She even recorded desperate pleas, begging him to leave her alone. But Craig, he refused to let go. On the afternoon of September 2, 2020, while talking three-way on the phone to her mom and best friend, Laura was blindsided when Craig showed up in her apartment. Earlier that day, Laura had recorded a desperate message for him, begging him to leave her alone and get away. But once again, he ignored her. As she was talking to her mother and friend, Laura's voice shook with fear. "Craig's here," she said, and then silence. The call cut out. Her friend, knowing something was terribly wrong, immediately called 911. Before they could get there, Laura left one last voicemail, frantically warning that Craig was going to kill her, begging him to get away. But when the police arrived, it was too late. Laura had been stabbed twice in the chest and brutally struck in the head so hard that the knife bent. Craig was found there too, injured with wounds to his chest and neck. His story? He said he simply walked in through an unlocked door, but investigators suspected those injuries were self-inflicted, staged to make it look like Laura had attacked him first. At trial, his defense was all over the place. He claimed he acted in self-defense after Laura attacked him with a knife, but the evidence didn't match up. 3 of his ex-girlfriends testified that they'd had to take out restraining orders against him because he was abusive. And then there was the big issue. Craig, standing at 6 feet tall and weighing 220 pounds, nearly a foot taller and over 100 pounds heavier than Laura, claimed he was in a life or death struggle. The prosecutor reminded the jury of Laura's physical condition, which made it nearly impossible for her to defend herself against someone like Craig. Craig, a former Air Force veteran, took the stand in his defense, but couldn't remember the details of the confrontation. The one thing that couldn't be denied was the voicemail, Laura's final cry for help, which rang out in the courtroom. The jury didn't take long to deliberate. After less than a day, they came back with a guilty verdict. He was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. Laura's death was a senseless tragedy. She did everything she could to escape Craig's grip, changing the locks, filing a restraining order, trying to cut ties. But no matter what she did, he kept finding a way back into her life. Melody Victoria Bennett, known as Tori to those who loved her, was born on January 24, 1985. At 33 years old, she was a vibrant, warm woman living in Bushnell, Florida. Tori had a reputation as a kind soul, someone who gave freely to others. Her life, full of potential and kindness, was tragically cut short in a way no one could have predicted. On January 25, 2018, Tori's brother, concerned after not hearing from her for several days, went to check on her. Inside her home, he discovered her lifeless body in the living room. What followed was nothing short of chilling. Sumter County Sheriff's deputies determined that Tori had died from multiple stab wounds. The crime scene suggested a violent, brutal attack with defensive wounds on her hands, indicating she fought for her life. It was clear this was no accident. It was murder. The medical examiner confirmed she had likely died between the night of January 21st and 22nd, just days before her 33rd birthday. As investigators canvassed the neighborhood, they spoke with 16-year-old Tyler Ryan Hirsch, who lived nearby. Hirsch told authorities that Tori was a family friend, someone he knew well, and denied knowing anything about the crime. But soon, things began to unravel. The bus driver who picked Hirsch up that morning overheard him talking about a woman who had been stabbed to death. The problem? At that point, law enforcement hadn't released any details about the crime. How could he know? That was just the first red flag. At school, Hirsch's story didn't add up. His teacher reported that on January 22nd, Hirsch had asked to go to the school nurse. He had a large cut on his hand, along with several smaller ones. When the nurse asked what happened, Hirsch told her it was personal, refusing to elaborate. The pieces were starting to fall into place. As the investigation deepened, Hirsch's story shifted. Detectives took a DNA sample from him to compare it with evidence from the crime scene. After months of waiting, the DNA came back a match. On January 17, 2019, nearly a year after Tori's death, Tyler Hirsch was arrested. Within a couple of months, he entered an open plea, effectively admitting to his crimes without a formal sentencing agreement. He was convicted of first-degree murder, attempted sexual battery while armed, burglary of a dwelling while armed, and 3 counts of battery on a law enforcement officer. The sentence, life in prison with no possibility of parole, no second chances. Tori's life was taken by someone she trusted, a neighbor, family friend. Hirsch's brutal betrayal left her family and the community heartbroken. The cold, calculated nature of the crime, coupled with the eerie nonchalance of the killer, made it even harder to comprehend. Her story, though tragically short, can still inspire us to be vigilant, to care for those around us, and to fight for justice when it's needed most. Then 50 years ago, a young boy's body was found in a Virginia creek. No name, no family, no one came forward to claim him. But now, after all these years, we finally know who he was. His name was Carl Matthew Bryant. He was just 4 years old. It was June 13, 1972, when a teenager discovered Carl's body in Massey Creek under a bridge on Old Colchester Road in Lorton, Virginia. He'd been beaten to death, blunt force trauma, a homicide. But no one had reported a child missing. No one was searching for him. A local church group stepped in to arrange his burial at Coleman Cemetery in Alexandria and gave him a name just so he wouldn't be buried as a nobody. And then the case went cold. For over 50 years, he remained a mystery, sometimes called John Lorton Doe, other times John Fairfax Doe. All investigators had were a few strands of hair collected during the autopsy. They held on to them, hoping one day the science would catch up. In 2003, a computer-generated sketch of the boy was released by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. It generated more leads than any Virginia case in their history, but every single one came up empty. The next year, detectives extracted mitochondrial DNA from the boy's hair and entered it into the national database. Still, no matches. In 2014, they tried to exhume the body to test for nuclear DNA, but his tombstone had been washed away by a storm. The exact burial plot was lost. Their only remaining hope was the hair. Then, in 2023, Fairfax detectives partnered with Astria Forensics, a lab capable of extracting DNA from the tiniest fragments. Usually they need 2 centimeters of hair, but Fairfax sent in just a few millimeters, barely anything. And against the odds, it worked. Astria developed a genetic profile that pointed to a family in Philadelphia. Investigators followed the trail to a woman named Vera Bryant, who had 2 sons, Carl, born in 1968, and James, born in 1972. According to family, Vera had left Philadelphia in June 1972 with her boyfriend, James Hedgepeth, and her 2 boys. They said they were heading to Virginia to visit family. But when Vera and Hedgepeth arrived, the children weren't with them. And when Vera returned to Philadelphia, she told her family the boys had stayed behind with Hedgepeth's relatives. That was the last time anyone ever saw Carl or James. No missing persons report was ever filed. No one outside the family knew they were gone. In July 2024, Vera's body was exhumed. DNA confirmed she was Carl's mother. Police now believe that Vera and Hedgepeth, who was not the boy's father, were responsible for Carl's murder, and likely for baby James' disappearance too. Detectives suspect the children were killed somewhere along the route from Philadelphia to Middlesex County, Virginia. Vera died in 1980. Her cause of death is unclear, but her manner of death was ruled a homicide. As for Hedgepeth, he had a violent history, including a 1962 murder conviction. He too is now deceased. Detectives believe 6-month-old James Bryant was likely killed around the same time as Carl and possibly discarded along the same route. But they haven't ruled out other possibilities. James could have been abandoned or even handed off to someone else. A baby that young wouldn't have memories, wouldn't be able to speak for himself. That's what makes it harder and even more heartbreaking. In interviews, Vera's former co-workers described her as soft-spoken and kind. She worked as a nursing assistant at a care home in Philadelphia, but she never talked about her boyfriend, never mentioned her children. When detectives came asking questions after her death, no one at work knew a thing. There are no known photos of Carl or James. The only image we have is a forensic reconstruction of Carl's face, created long before we even knew his name. Now we do. A child murdered and discarded under a bridge. Now remembered. Now named. Detectives are planning to place a memorial bench near the area where he was buried, since the exact gravesite was lost years ago. But the mystery isn't entirely over. There's still one more child missing, James Bryant, just 6 months old at the time. He's presumed dead, but his body has never been found. Fairfax police are asking the public for help. If you knew Vera Bryant or James Hedgepeth, or if you remember anything strange along the route between Philadelphia and Virginia in June of 1972, please come forward. Even the smallest detail might help. Fairfax County Police Chief Kevin Davis said it best. Maybe somebody witnessed something that day. Maybe Vera or James confided in someone before they died. Or maybe a 6-month-old's remains were found in another jurisdiction and no one ever knew how to tie it back to this case. If you know anything at all, please contact the Fairfax County Police Department's Cold Case Squad. And if you suspect child abuse today, please don't wait. Call the Child Help National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-4-A-CHILD. That's 1-800-422-4453. Or visit childhelp.org. Every call is free and confidential. Roseanne Michelle Sturtz was born on May 20, 1955 in Baltimore, Maryland. To her family and friends, she was simply Anne. At just 20 years old, she had a bright personality, a big heart, and a growing sense of independence. She worked at a local nightclub and was doing her best to build a life in the city she called home. But in the summer of 1975, everything changed. On August 24th, Roseanne was last seen outside the TikTok club on Utah Street in downtown Baltimore. That night, she met a man at a bar in Howard County. What started as a casual encounter quickly turned into something much darker. Investigators believed the two got into an argument, and that same night she disappeared. For months, no one knew what had happened to her. Then, on December 15, 1975, her body was discovered in a wooded area near what's now the Oakland Ridge Industrial Park off Route 108 in Columbia, Maryland. She had no identification. She became just another Jane Doe. Detectives released a sketch of the victim. In March 1976, someone who worked with her at the nightclub recognized the face in the paper. That's how they finally identified her. But even with a name, the case quickly went cold. There was no DNA to test, no witness to her death, very little physical evidence. And for nearly 50 years, her family had no answers, just silence. But in 2024, that finally changed. Howard County Police Detective Corporal Wade Zuffel reopened the case. And in doing so, he found something buried deep in the files. An old cassette tape from 1981. It contained an interview with a man already serving time for other murders. His name was Charles William Davis Jr. Back in 1981, Davis had been offered full immunity to talk about Roseanne's case. He agreed to the interview, but when detectives showed him a photo of Roseanne, one taken years before her death, he said he didn't recognize her. It looked like a dead end, but Corporal Zuffel didn't give up. He started corresponding with Davis, who'd been incarcerated at Jessup Correctional Institution since 1978. Eventually, Zuffel brought him to the Howard County Police Northern Headquarters in Ellicott City for a second interview. This time, he showed Davis a different photo, a mugshot of Roseanne taken just a month before her murder. And this time, Davis recognized her. She still had the scar, he said, looking at the photo. Then he nodded and confessed. He admitted that he had met Roseanne at the bar in 1975. They got into an argument. He killed her. He said he didn't want to die without giving her family closure. In November 2024, nearly 5 decades after her murder, Roseanne's family finally got the answers they had been waiting for. Sadly, her sister Belinda passed away just 5 months before Davis's confession. She didn't live to see justice officially served, but she died knowing the truth was on its way. Because of the immunity granted in 1981, Davis cannot be charged with Roseanne's murder, but Howard County Police have now officially closed the case, declaring it exceptionally cleared. While Davis won't face a courtroom again for Roseanne's case, he's already serving 3 life sentences for the murders of 3 other young women, and their stories deserve to be remembered too. The first was Lydia Victoria Norman, a 16-year-old girl from Baltimore. On September 11th, 1975, Lydia was found strangled near BWI Airport. She had reportedly refused Davis's advances, and for that, he took her life. Lydia was just a teenager, full of promise with her whole future ahead of her. Next was Kathleen Diane Cook, 24 years old. On New Year's Eve, 1975, Kathleen disappeared after a night out at a nightclub. Davis later confessed to shooting her multiple times with a .38 revolver. When she somehow survived, he stabbed her to death. Her body was later found in a rural area. She never lived to see 1976. Then there was Peggy Ellen Pompion, aged 23. On August 24, 1976, almost exactly 1 year after Roseanne's murder, Peggy was abducted and subjected to horrific violence. She was sexually assaulted, stabbed, mutilated, and shot 5 times. Ballistics linked her murder to the same weapon used to kill Kathleen. While Davis has been locked up since 1977, it wasn't until 2024 that Roseanne's family finally got the same closure the others had received decades ago. He may never face another judge or jury, but one photo and one detective's determination gave Roseanne her voice back. And now, after nearly 50 years, her story won't end as just another unsolved case. She was known, she was loved, and now she's remembered. Andrea Lauren Andy Delvesco was born on June 29, 1994 in Chicago, Illinois to Arthur and Leslie Delvesco. From the start, Andy was electric, bright, curious, fiercely loyal, and always moving. She had a deep love for animals, especially dogs and turtles, and her passions ran wide. Art, music, photography, writing, great food, and long, meaningful conversations. She soaked up life with both hands, and when you were around her, you felt it. After graduating St. Andrew's Episcopal School in Austin, Texas in 2012, she headed to UCLA, majoring in psychology and Spanish. She had a natural empathy and a passion for Latin culture. Andy was supposed to be in court for drug-related charges on September 25, 2015, for allegedly possessing controlled substances for sale. It had been weighing on her. Some of her friends later admitted she'd been scared. Scared about what would happen. Scared about who might retaliate. Because in the world of drug distribution, people at the bottom of the chain, especially if they're seen as vulnerable or likely to talk, can quickly become a target. But 4 days before that hearing, around 5:30 a.m., a UCLA student named Sarah Murr was just getting home to her apartment on Roebling Avenue. Her boyfriend had called an early flight, and as she was unlocking her door, she noticed a man coming down the stairs. He was wearing a red and blue tank top, jeans, and a baseball cap. It struck her as odd enough that she called her boyfriend. Then she went to sleep. About 45 minutes later, Sarah was jolted awake by the sound of a woman screaming, shrill, terrified, and the whimper of a dog. She called 911. That call captured more than just her words. In the background, you can hear it, a woman's voice, panicked and pleading. The operator told Sarah that officers were on their way, and they were. 4 LAPD officers showed up, 2 rookies and 2 veterans. Sarah explained what she'd seen and what she'd heard. She even pointed out the unit below hers. "That's where I think it's coming from," she told them. But what happened next still raises painful questions. The officers looked around the outside of the building. One of them reportedly shined a flashlight into the window of what would later be identified as Andy's bedroom. "No one in bed," he said. "They didn't knock. They didn't try the door. And in less than 7 minutes, they were gone." Sarah watched all of this from her window. No one told her anything. She tried texting people in the unit below. No answer. She even called out Andy, but it was silent. Then came a loud crash. She ran to her balcony and looked down. Smoke was billowing from Andy's apartment. And that same man, the one from earlier, was jumping off the balcony and sprinting away. She dialed 911 again. Inside, Andy's roommates, who had slept through the earlier screams, were now waking up to the smoke alarm. One remembered seeing Andy curled up in bed, blood on her neck and shoulders, motionless. They called her name but couldn't reach her. The fire had already taken over the room. Firefighters arrived quickly. It took 32 of them about 15 minutes to get the flames under control. What they found inside was devastating. Andy's body was on the bed, so badly burned that she was initially identified as a Jane Doe. Her parents wouldn't know the truth until dental records confirmed it. The autopsy showed she'd been stabbed 19 times, wounds so deep they severed both carotid arteries. She likely died before the fire was ever set. At the foot of her bed, Shea Panda, her sweet dog, was still alive, but barely, severely burned and struggling to breathe. He was rushed to a vet, but had to be euthanized to end his suffering. An arson expert later testified that a trash can had been emptied on the bed and set on fire. There was no doubt the fire was deliberate. 2 suspects were eventually arrested: 22-year-old Alberto Medina, a Fresno State student, and Eric Marquez, 23, who lived just steps away from Andy's building and was a student at UCLA. That night, the two had burglarized an apartment across the street. Prosecutors believe Medina then broke into Andy's apartment, murdered her, and set the fire to cover it up. Marquez stayed outside, helped clean up, and disposed of stolen items. Police later found evidence in Medina's Fresno apartment: a bloody knife, women's underwear believed to be Andy's, and other stolen goods. But what ultimately led them there was something almost too bizarre to believe. Medina had given stolen speakers to a friend, who then re-registered them online. When police tracked him down, the friend admitted Medina had asked him to do it. Medina eventually confessed to being at the scene, but tried to shift the blame onto Marquez. Both were charged. Medina was convicted of first-degree murder, arson, burglary, and animal cruelty. He was sentenced to life without parole. Marquez took a plea deal and served less than 3 years in prison. Andy's family was shattered. Arthur and Leslie Delvesco tried to understand what had happened during that first 911 call. Why hadn't the police done more? Why didn't they even knock on the door? But when they started asking questions, they were stonewalled. "We were rebuffed," Arthur said. "We were made to feel like asking was inappropriate." Eventually, 2 officers, Rodell Sudduth and Alicia Williams, were fired for mishandling the initial response. Their attorney claimed they acted reasonably, that Sarah's call was vague and there were no signs of forced entry. He said they'd considered knocking, but decided it wasn't necessary. Sarah strongly disagreed. She'd been clear, she'd heard screaming. And after the fire, when she ran outside and told one of the officers she was the one who had called earlier, she asked if they'd knocked. He told her no. Andy's body was so badly burned that her family was never able to see her one last time. They've praised the homicide detectives who worked tirelessly to bring her killers to justice. But when it comes to LAPD's accountability, they still feel like they've been left in the dark. "We'll never know if she was still alive when that first call came in," Leslie said. "But we do know the fire hadn't been set yet. That means we might have gotten to say goodbye." Russell Davis was born on February 16, 1995 to Ligia Macbeth and Ron Davis. He was full of life, sharp, confident, passionate about music, and like a lot of 17-year-olds, just starting to figure out who he wanted to be in the world. But on the night of November 23, 2012, the day after Thanksgiving, Jordan's voice was silenced over something as trivial as loud music. That evening, Jordan and his 3 friends, Tommy Storns, Leland Brunson, and Tevin Thompson, were riding around Jacksonville, Florida. They stopped at a Gate Petroleum gas station on the corner of Southside Boulevard and Bay Meadows Road. Just 4 teenagers running in for gum and cigarettes, music blasting from their red Dodge Durango. At the same time, 47-year-old Michael Dunn, a software developer from Satellite Beach, had just left his son's wedding with his fiancée, Rhonda Rower. They were on their way back to their hotel nearby and stopped at the same gas station to grab a bottle of wine and chips. Dunn pulled his black Volkswagen Jetta into the spot right next to the teen's SUV. As Rhonda headed inside, Dunn stayed behind, and the music, the bass thumping from the SUV, immediately got under his skin. Rhonda would later testify that as she walked toward the store, Dunn muttered something like, "I hate that thug music." He would later try to soften it, saying he actually said rap crap. Either way, it was clear he had a problem. The boys were listening to Beef by Lil Reese, Lil Durk, and Frito Santana. Dunn rolled down his window and asked them to turn it down. Tevin Thompson, sitting in the front, turned the music off, but it didn't stay off for long. Jordan, sitting in the back seat, pushed back, told his friend to turn it back up. That's when things escalated. Voices were raised. According to Dunn, Jordan cursed at him. He claimed he heard the words cracker or white boy. He also claimed that Jordan showed him a gun, but no gun was ever found. Not in the vehicle, not at the scene, not anywhere. Police, witnesses, and forensic investigators all confirmed there was no weapon. Still, Michael Dunn reached into his glove compartment, pulled out his handgun, a weapon he legally carried, and fired 10 shots into the SUV. He shot through the rear passenger door where Jordan was sitting. 3 bullets hit Jordan. 1 pierced his aorta. As the boys tried to escape, Dunn stepped out of his car, took a tactical stance, and continued firing as the SUV backed away. The boys sped to another parking lot, desperate to get away and help their friend. Jordan was gasping for air. Within moments, he was gone. Meanwhile, Rhonda came back to the car to find Dunn calm, collected, and ready to go. The two returned to their hotel. They ordered pizza, had some drinks, and watched movies. At no point did Dunn call 911. He never reported the shooting. Early the next morning, they drove 2.5 hours back to their home in Satellite Beach. That's when Dunn claimed he saw a news story on his phone that Jordan had died. He said he vomited from the shock, but again, he still didn't call the police. Instead, Dunn was arrested later that day, after a witness at the gas station gave police his license plate number. When investigators searched the SUV, they found no weapons and no sign that a gun or even a stick, as Dunn would later claim, was ever involved. A forensic team determined that even if the boys had tried to hide a weapon, there was no way it wouldn't have been immediately found. Dunn told a very different story. He claimed Jordan got out of the car. He claimed he saw a barrel pointed at him. He said he was terrified, but his own fiancée, called to testify as an adversarial witness, said he never mentioned seeing a gun that night. At trial, prosecutors didn't buy it, and neither did the jury. In February 2014, Michael Dunn was found guilty on 3 counts of attempted second-degree murder for firing at the other boys in the SUV. But the jury deadlocked on the charge of first-degree murder for Jordan's death. A mistrial was declared on that count, but prosecutors weren't done. In October 2014, Dunn stood trial again, this time just for Jordan's murder. He took the stand in his own defense, repeating the same story, that he feared for his life, that Jordan had threatened him. Prosecutor Erin Wolfson dismantled that claim piece by piece. She reminded jurors that Dunn didn't fire warning shots. He aimed directly at Jordan Davis with both hands on the gun. The jury agreed Dunn was convicted of first-degree murder. Judge Russell Healy handed down the maximum sentence: life without parole for killing Jordan Davis, plus 3 consecutive 30-year terms for the attempted murders of the other boys, and another 15 years for firing into a moving vehicle. Before sentencing, Dunn addressed the court. He said he regretted what happened. He called himself mortified and said he wished he could roll back time. Whether it was justified or not, he said, "I'm mortified I took a life." But Jordan's parents didn't hear remorse. Ron Davis, Jordan's father, said the old Ron Davis died that very night with Jordan. He remembered kissing his son for the first time in the hospital when he was born, and for the last time in the funeral home. Lucia, Jordan's mother, wasn't moved either. She said she saw no humility in Dunn, only emptiness, and that's what he'll carry for the rest of his life. Katharina K. Reitzbrau was born on September 8, 1931 in Mainz, West Germany, to Ludwig and Maria Reitz. By 1980, Kay was 48 years old, living a quiet life with her husband Charles in a modest trailer home on Rosewood Avenue in Ayer, Massachusetts. Just weeks earlier, she'd survived a heart attack. She was home recovering, trying to regain her strength. But on the morning of May 21, 1980, her life was taken in one of the most brutal ways imaginable. Between 7 to 10 a.m. when her husband left for work and 10:45 a.m. when her daughter-in-law, Eugenia, discovered her body, Kay had been stabbed more than 30 times. 5 of those wounds pierced her heart. She was also beaten with a blunt object, likely a ceramic lamp found bloodied inside the home. Her small frame lay crumpled on the bedroom floor, fully clothed and surrounded by signs of a struggle. Her home had been ransacked. Her purse was gone, along with jewelry and a large sum of cash she kept hidden in the linen closet. The faucet was still running in the kitchen, and a paring knife, later confirmed to be the murder weapon, was found in the trash can. Kay's murder shocked the community. She'd been a familiar face in town, a former employee of Bemis Bag Company in nearby Pepperell. She was known as kind and hardworking, the sort of person who didn't deserve an in like this. 2 years passed with no arrest. Then in October 1982, police arrested Kenneth Waters, a 29-year-old local man who lived nearby and worked at the Park Street Diner where Kay was a regular. Kenneth always said he was innocent. On the morning of the murder, he had an alibi. He worked the breakfast shift and then appeared in court at 9 a.m. for an unrelated matter. He said he was in the courthouse with his attorney until after 11 and then returned to the diner. There were no blood stains, no cuts on his body, and fingerprints from the scene didn't match his. But police didn't let it go. 2 ex-girlfriends, Brenda Marsh and Rosanna Perry, gave statements after hours of interrogation, statements that would ultimately help convict him. Brenda initially denied Kenneth ever confessed, but changed her story after police allegedly threatened to charge her as an accessory and take her kids away. Rosanna, too, initially said she knew nothing, but after 3 hours of questioning and threats, she claimed Kenneth had once mentioned stabbing a woman and stealing money. Kenneth was tried in 1983. Prosecutors leaned heavily on those statements, despite key forensic evidence excluding him. Hairs found in Kay's hand and on the murder weapon didn't match her or Kenneth. Fingerprint records that could have exonerated him were never shared with the defense. He was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison. But his younger sister, Betty Ann Waters, refused to believe it. She made it her life's mission to prove his innocence. Over the next 18 years, she put herself through college and then law school, all to fight for her brother's freedom. Eventually, she teamed up with the Innocence Project. In 2000, they located crime scene evidence that had been preserved and secured court permission for DNA testing. That test changed everything. The blood found at the scene, originally thought to match Kenneth's type O blood, was from a male, but it wasn't his. His conviction was officially vacated on March 15, 2001. Kenneth walked free after nearly 2 decades behind bars. For the first time in years, he was able to live. He found a job, reconnected with his family, and embraced a world that had changed while he was locked away. But the celebration didn't last. Just 6 months later, in September 2001, Kenneth slipped, hit his head, and died at the age of 47. Betty Ann later said Kenneth had the best 6 months of his life. For years after Kenneth's exoneration, Kay's case remained unsolved, but investigators didn't give up. In 2022, the cold case unit of the Middlesex County DA's office turned to genetic genealogy. Working with Parabon Nanolabs, they isolated a genetic profile from the original crime scene evidence. That led to 2 deceased brothers as potential suspects. With the help of living relatives who voluntarily provided DNA samples, scientists at Bode Laboratories made a breakthrough. The DNA belonged to Joseph Leo Boudreau, a longtime Massachusetts resident born in Natick in 1943. He'd been convicted of armed robbery in New Hampshire in 1975 and moved to Ogunquit, Maine in 1987. He died in 2004 at the age of 61. Investigators found no link whatsoever between Boudreau and Kenneth Waters. On June 27, 2024, more than 4 decades after Kay's murder, authorities announced that Boudreau had been conclusively identified as the man responsible. Though Boudreau can't face trial, the truth matters. It clears Kenneth Waters' name completely, and it brings long overdue answers to a family that's waited 44 years to know who killed Katerina Braille. Justice doesn't always look like handcuffs in courtrooms. Sometimes it looks like the truth rising up after decades of silence.